Welcome to today's episode of Tech Beyond Gender podcast. I'm your host, Meena Satish Kumar, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Tanya Boelema. Tanya is the head of architecture at Bank of New Zealand with several years of experience in New Zealand's tech sector. Tanya's commitment to creating inclusive environments and advancing equity in tech sector makes her an inspiring figure and an invaluable voice in our discussions. As a single mom, Tanya will offer a unique perspective on navigating the tech sector as a single parent. We are excited to hear her insights in today's episode. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Nice to have you here. Can you share a bit about your background and your journey into the tech sector?
Sure. It was very organic, I should say, but it started really a long time ago. My father was a salesman for a company called Armstrong and Springle that used to sell office equipment around New Zealand, and back then that was typewriters. And then the first electronic typewriters came out, and then computers came out, and he sold, I believe, I'm not sure, I haven't really fact checked it. This is what he told me when I was a child. He sold the first Apple Macintosh computer in New Zealand. And he also used to wear this badge that had IBM on it. But instead of it being, it had it was the IBM logo, but it had I bought Macintosh as the subtext, which was really quite funny. And I spent a lot of time playing with the Apple Mac because he was able to take one home because he took a demo model around. So that would be at home. And I spent a bit of time, I taught myself a bit of basic coding using the Apple Mac, and I played a few of the very early games on there. And I just really enjoyed it. I was so super curious, so I was just wanting to see what this thing could do. So that's when it started. So I was still quite young. I was at high school, more intermediate high school, that kind of age when that all happened. Then I, went through high school, did a bit of computer science stuff, went to university. I did a Bachelor of Commerce in Information Management and Accounting. And I started a BA in my final year. I started a BA in education because I figured out that actually that's probably the best way to affect any kind of, meaningful impact on society is through education. And then I got a bit sick of university. I'd been there 4 years and I was going to go and do a master's, but I decided to go work for a startup. And it was a food startup. So it was in Christchurch. They were making handmade Belgian chocolates for the luxury market. And they were looking to, at that time, it was the late 80s, early 90s. And at that time, doing anything that involved exporting to Japan was really hot. So they wanted to export chocolate to Japan. So I thought, oh, this will be a good thing to get on board. They had a role as an office administrator, and I thought, I don't care what I'm doing. If I get on board at the ground floor, then I can always work my way up. And I got in touch with them, and they'd already employed somebody, but they wanted to employ me as well, but they didn't have enough money to pay a salary that they would normally pay for. And I said, well, I'll start on 17,000. And if by the end of the year I've performed, I want to be on 24. And they said, sure. So they're a very entrepreneurial bunch of people. And that's what happened. So I joined. I became more of I've always liked chocolate, but I became even more of a chocolate connoisseur. I set up their accounting system. I was hired out by my boss to do consulting work with other small businesses, doing debt collection, creditor work, setting up their computer system. So I was already into like configuration big time, but it was all finance type stuff. And then after a year, I was getting itchy feet and decided to move to the UK for a bit. and worked as a financial planning analyst for one of the largest jewelry retail chains in the UK. And one of the things that I worked on was setting up a reporting system and a database and reporting system for the branch and regional sales managers to calculate their bonuses. So I learnt lots about SQL queries. I set up an Access database to put all this stuff. I downloaded it from the IBM mainframe, the AS400. All the data, created a database, and created a whole bunch of Prism reports over the top, and used a rubric to calculate who would get what kind of bonus and who would not. And there was like 600 branches across the UK, and I think across 6 regions. So it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. So I've always been into data and information and all of that kind of stuff. After, how long was I there for? About 3 or 4 years, I came back to New Zealand. One of the things that my boss said at the time, he says, I don't understand why you're in finance. He said, you're incredibly creative. You should be in marketing or something like that. And I went, oh, okay. So I came back to New Zealand. I did a bit of career counselling. And then I got into technical writing because I'm really, really curious. I like to know how things work. So I spent a bit of time. I've worked in lots of different sectors. I worked with Ericsson when they first started laying fibre and cable around New Zealand. I worked with the engineers to try and, so my job, I've always described myself as a translator. I translate from one specific language into lay people language, and I like to draw pictures. So I had a great time with the engineers, understanding how all of that stuff worked. I also worked for a lighting company, like, as I was self-employed at this point. So I discovered that business as usual operational work was not for me. I like novelty, and I need to be doing something that's requires me to really think about how things work and how to optimize things and how to make things better for people, and how to understand stuff. So always saw myself as like a translator and an explainer. And so yeah, I had lots of different clients. I worked for Trustpower, so I've been in the electricity industry, a lighting company, a lighting ballast manufacturer in Auckland, all sorts of things like that. So I suddenly found myself doing things like business analysis, and then I got into solution architecture at one point, which was really interesting. And then I moved into business architecture because I'm mostly concerned with people and process and information. I know technology can do what you tell it to do. If you're really clear, it's like, with a toddler, it'll do exactly what you ask, nothing more, nothing less. So the technology wasn't really the thing that what I got fired up about. Is like how to use technology to make things better for people, to make processes more streamlined, and to make information more available. So that's my sort of sweet spot. Yeah, so, and then I moved so from business architecture, I moved into enterprise architecture, and alongside those two things, I did a whole lot of work in knowledge management and also change management. So I'm certified ProSci change management practitioner as well, which is all about how to make things stick with people. It's very much a people side of the things. And I'm currently at the Bank of New Zealand, and I'm the head of architecture for Colleague Enablement and Data at the BNZ. So I'm still in that big picture space because that's my jam.
Well, Tanya, it was so awesome to hear your journey and how your inquisitive nature of deriving value from technology to business sort of led you to this journey, right?
Yeah.
So in your initial stages, like you mentioned to me about how when you moved to New Zealand from UK, you were involved in translating the technical language to business language, right?
Yeah.
So, how was that experience for you? And which year was it when you started that piece of work?
Oh, that would have been the mid to late 90s.
Mid to late
Um,
90s.
yeah. And I was working with like the electrical engineers, so around
Oh,
cabling and all of that kind of stuff. And I was fascinated by it. It was so cool. It was all about it was the precursor to Saturn television, I think it was called,
okay.
in New Zealand. So first foray of New Zealand into cable TV. And um just really, really enjoyed working with the engineers, so asking them really open questions about what they were doing, and getting them to explain to me how everything worked. And then what I had to do was like draw and write what they'd said and replay it back to them from the perspective of, if I was somebody that had to install this particular thing, what would I need to do and what would I need to know? So I'd write it from different perspectives, and it was just a great way to understand all that stuff. And I devoured it. So I'd have quite a high cadence of turnaround. I'd be very quick with what I produce. It's the whole fail fast thing, right? So it's like I'm not somebody that likes to work away on something in the background and not share it. I like to make sure that I've got I'm on the right track from the get-go. So yeah.
So, how did you gain that confidence to work in a completely different technical space? I assume you didn't have that engineering background, right, when you started work on this in
Correct.
electric.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how did you get the confidence to sort of quickly transition into a completely technical space, working with engineers in the 90s? I assume there were not many women around in those engineering teams.
Correct. I just wanted to know how it all worked. I don't I'm just, my curiosity always gets the better of me. It's not so much about, it's like I go into situations like that. It's like I don't know anything. So I'm an open book, right? So there's no, I'm just here to absorb. I've always loved learning and very into all sorts of different things. So it was just like another thing to discover and unpack. Um, I've never felt the need to be the smartest person in the room around stuff like that. It's like it's better for people to think I know nothing, because then they'll over explain. But then I can synth that what I'm really good at is taking a lot of disparate information and synthesizing it and essentializing it down. So making less out of more. So if there's a lot of stuff, I can distill it. So um the ability to do that and show people what they've told me in a really concise form is always really rewarding for both me as a creative type and for the person who's been talking to me about a thing that they really, really love, and me be able to reflect it back and they go, yeah, that's exactly it. So that's what motivates me. Yeah.
Awesome. You've
Yeah.
literally been an architect since 1990s then, right?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah, pretty
without the
much.
formal title. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Were there many architects in the 90s? Like, was there even a formal title as an architect?
I don't think so. I never really came across anybody in the business world with the title architect that wasn't like a classical architect that architected buildings. It wasn't until, when was it? Sort of early 2000s. I went across, because my heritage is Dutch, and I went to see family in Holland for a bit, and had an uncle, and he worked for IBM, ironically. Not my father's brother, my mother's brother. And he I was described, he said, describe what you do. And I said, "Oh, it's hard to, it's like, I don't know, there's no name. I haven't found a name for it." I said, "But these are the things that I do." And he goes, "That's what I do." And I said, okay, well, what's your job title? He said, I'm a business architect. I said, oh, perhaps that's what I am as well. Yeah, but that was even in the early 2000s. It wasn't really that nomenclature isn't something that I was exposed to at that point. So whether it was there or not is another thing. But I certainly wasn't aware of it to that degree, other than solution architecting, which was coming about around that time because technology had moved on to sort of more platform-based technologies rather than sort of, big monoliths and mainframes and things like that. So solutioning was starting to become a thing. That was probably, early 2000s, early to mid 2000s that was happening.
And when did you transition into information technology?
I've pretty much always been in that field. There's always been an IT element around. So when I was working with Ericsson, I was also working with other clients and it was usually technology related systems that I was working with. I've always, since the time my dad bought the Apple Macintosh home, it's always been in my life. So I've never really seen it as me specifically looking for work in the technology industry. I've always just dabbled in it, or it's been an integral part of my work life.
Awesome. Like, I know you have a child.
Yes.
Now, when you became a mother, did you actually have to take a break from working?
Yes. Yeah. So before I had my daughter, I was working for myself. I'd been self-employed for about 15 years. And my work week would typically be 2 days. So I'd work in my professional capacity Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I did a 4-day working week. I did that for a long time because I found that if I did that and I did something completely different on the Wednesday, I was as productive over 4 days as I would be if I'd worked 5 days. Plus, I got the bonus of doing something that was really, really cool. Like I spent a year just doing art on a Wednesday, and then I spent a year as a senior research assistant at Vic in the education department. And then, because I was doing my master's in education at that time, and then I got pregnant and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to take some time off. So I took off, I think it was 16 months. I wanted to be off work as long as possible. I was 40 when I had her. And I thought, I'm going to take as much time as I possibly can because you never get time. Time is the most precious resource. You never get that back. Everything else you can probably negotiate or trade off, but you can't trade off time. So I wanted to be with her. And then when she was about 16 months old, my brain was like, I need something. So I went back to work part-time and I deliberately chose to go backwards. So when I left working, I was in fairly senior sort of advisory roles and as a business architect and stuff. And I thought, I don't want the burden of that as well as raising a child. So I went back part-time, 24 hours a week, doing technical writing, which I could do easy. It's like, okay, I can put that down at the end of the day and I don't need to worry about it, all that kind of stuff. So I did that, but couldn't really help myself. And within a couple of months, I was working with the CIO of the place I was working at and doing strategic advice and architecture. So my plan didn't work. I couldn't help myself. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I need to transition into more work. But then I got really sick. I got, I was hospitalized and I couldn't work for quite a while. I had to be, I was in hospital for 3 weeks. And I'd only been working for about 4 or 5 months at that point. So I had zero money. I went on to the sickness benefit. I had to have surgery. It was quite an intense time. And at that point, I thought, oh, maybe I need to have a real job, a proper job for a while while I've got this little dependent. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. So I got some work in the same place I was working for, same client. They offered me a fixed term contract. So I'd had two of those a year each. And then they had a role that came up, which was the head of architecture, knowledge management, and change management, which I went for and got. And that was my first sort of proper job in quite a number of years. So I led the architecture practice, the knowledge management practice, and the change management practice. So I had three teams, and juggling that. By that time, my daughter was about 3. So I have to say, thank goodness for 20 hours free early childhood education, and the fact that there are childcare facilities that run before work and go up to 6 o'clock. So actually, I was able to manage that quite well. I was in the public sector, so the travel requirement really wasn't there, which was good. And I could still, I was exhausted, but I could still have dedicated time for work and then dedicated time with my child. That all changed when she went to school, because before school and after school care is a whole different kettle of fish, and it doesn't run for the same sort of hours as the for preschoolers. Fortunately, the school that my daughter goes to or went to, they had after school care on site. That I could get her enrolled in, which was great, but no before school care. And again, that changed because my daughter is now intermediate and that in between age. So there is no after school care, but she doesn't have siblings. And so that whole space around between 3 o'clock and 5 or 6 o'clock in the evenings quite challenging. That'll get better with time. And, everything's temporary with children because they are continuously growing up and everything is changing. So all the time, it's never in one place for any length of period. So it's like I'm very much a play the long game kind of thing. So I know for 15 years that my priority is going to be my child and not my career. Before then it was, I could do my career and I could do all my other activities and things like that, but it's another human being, so she is the priority.
But even though you said that your career is not your priority, I was quite amazed by all of the work that you did soon after having a child, right? Like you went in as a technical writer, and very soon you couldn't help yourself and became an architect in an
Yeah.
advisory role. And like when you went back, did it really have any impact on your level of confidence? Because you went back to work after a break of 16 months. Did you feel that uh, your contacts have moved on, or this environment had changed, or for some reason you felt you didn't have much confidence going back?
um no, I no, my confidence was fine. Levels of exhaustion were not. Um, and I had more frustration than lack of confidence. So I'm somebody that likes to really get stuck into something and just go hard. And that is not possible when you are sole parenting, because you have to I found I had to create some really, really strong boundaries between parenting time and professional time. Whereas before it was like it didn't really matter. So I had to learn that, and I had to be, but I mean, like some people find that a bit scary, or, you know, the confidence to say, no, I'm not available. I've never had a problem with saying, no, I'm not available. So that's probably a particular thing about me, but I know that it is difficult for other people to say if they've tried to be about. I look at I have friends that similar situations, and they're working ridiculous hours, but because they want to be the best parent and the best person at work. But I've got a few rules that I apply, which is like, in 5 years' time, who's going to remember? And in 5 years' time, who's going to care about what it is that I'm doing today? And that makes it really easy, because in 5 years' time, the person that's going to remember if I'm available or not is my child. It's not going to be the workplace. So that's kind of the test that I have, and I have particular rituals as well to help me. It's a way of compartmentalizing, I guess, but it's like every day in the morning, I go for a walk and I get a coffee, and then that's a transition time from being a mother to a professional. And the same with my face, right? So I don't wear makeup during the weekends, but when I'm at work, I wear a bit of makeup, and that's my professional face as opposed to my mum face. So there's a few things like that I do to flip my consciousness, I guess. And then when I'm at work, I'm fully at work. I'm not worried about my child. I know that she's at school or whatever, and she's taken care of, and that's okay. I don't think about her at all when I'm at work. As soon as I'm on my way home and back to her, then she gets all my attention, and work is second place. So there are times, obviously, where I have to pull extra out of the hat for work, but I'll do that after she's gone to bed. So my time with her is not compromised by my time required for work, which means I end up staying up quite late some nights just to do the things that I need to do, but that's just how it is. Yeah.
In initial stages, when you mentioned to me that you had childcare and up to 6 o'clock, and in the mornings you would go to work and stuff, did you ever feel guilty? Because that's something that I commonly hear from parents saying that they feel guilty when sending their kids to the childcare center and not being there for them and stuff.
Yeah, so what I did is I didn't just have a childcare centre, I had a nanny. So what I wanted, I did a whole lot of research on brain development and bonding and attachment theory and things like that. And I wanted her to have consistency of care. So whether it was me or another adult, it had to be the same adult. So I had a nanny. I can't quite remember how I configured it. So I know, to begin with, she was only at a childcare centre for 2 days a week, and the rest of the time she was with a nanny. So I did the childcare centre thing so that she had exposure to other small humans and other stimulating activities that I wasn't able to provide, or I didn't have the wherewithal to do. And then when she's with the nanny, like the nanny, to begin with, when I first went back to work, the nanny would come to work at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I could breastfeed my daughter. So I would, because I fed her until she was about 2. So the nanny, and by that stage, by the time I came back to work, she was only having a morning feed and an afternoon feed, and the nanny would come in for the morning feed, and then she would pick me up from work. She had my car, pick me up from work, and then I'd feed her then, and then stuff. And then the nanny also helped with some of the housework and stuff. But yeah,
Wow.
that's how I balanced it, because I didn't, yeah, you're right. I mean, I would have, the thought of putting my child into care, into a group setting from the age of 2, before work and after work, was not something I was prepared to do. Yeah.
Mm.
So I figured out a way to make that work.
Yeah. Can you describe any specific challenges you faced in balancing your professional responsibilities with motherhood?
Um, the ones that really spring to mind are anything that involves travel. That's really difficult because I don't have family in Wellington. So I have sister in Christchurch, a brother who's in New Zealand 6 months out of the year, and the rest of the time he's in the States. Both on the South Island, and my mother is in the South Island as well. So I don't have like family around me where I can just call on unconditional support. So I'd have to get a babysitter or a nanny in, or the first trip I took overseas when I was back at work. I mean, my daughter was, I think she was 4, nearly 5, so she wasn't in school, and my mother was still able to help. So my mother's 85 now, so she can't, and she won't travel. She's very frail, but 7 or 8 years ago, that was a different story. So she came up to Wellington and looked after my child while I went away. There is, the mother penalty is real. So any like events that happen early in the morning, like a 7 o'clock breakfast and stuff, it's just like, no, I can't go. Or, evening events and things like that, unless I want to get a babysitter. But then, you're paying to do work stuff in the evening. And it's like, actually, so it is tricky. But life's full of trade-offs, right? So there's always a trade-off. Fortunately, the roles that I've had haven't required me to do things that are regularly outside of the 9 to 5 window. So having certainty about the boundary around work has really made a difference. I really feel for people who have to do shift work, or, single parents who don't have the luxuries and the privileges that I have in the roles that I've deliberately chosen as opportunities have popped up. So I say my career is very organic. It is, but what I've done is, with every door that opens and every opportunity that pops up, it's like, what are the trade-offs? What am I trading off to take to walk through that door? So yeah, I
So,
feel very fortunate. Yeah.
yeah, not being able to network after work, working hours, or going for breakfast with work colleagues, did that really have any impact on your career progression, that networking aspect?
Um, it's hard to know because I can't run the parallel universe where it does happen. I know, I mean, I did go to networking things before, but I never really like them. I find them, I'm an introvert, so I prefer to hang out with 2 or 3 people. But I know a lot goes on in those spaces that I miss out on. But it's hard to know what I've missed out on. Because the other thing is, like, I'm really intentional about what I do choose to do. And so I'm involved in mentoring. I've mentored women in tech. I have 2 mentors at the moment. One is provided by BNZ where I work, and the other one is the Women in Tech. There's a mentoring circle there. Both are really interesting and exciting ways to connect with other people and spot opportunities. And the other thing is, there's always coffee. Coffee's the great connector in Wellington in particular. COVID put paid to that for a bit. But being in the office a few days a week, hybrid working, and going out for coffee with people is kind of my way of doing that. And there's also things like LinkedIn now as well. So there's a lot of opportunities through that professional social media network. And then there's podcasting as well. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I find myself on one today. But I've got some favorite podcasts where I'm always continually learning and things like that. And I pick up names and then I'll research it topic, I'll go down the rabbit hole, and then I'll find out who in New Zealand is doing that. And if I'm interested, if my interest is genuine, I'll follow that through. So there's different ways. Technology's provided different ways of doing that now to the to the more traditional, a breakfast meetup or a meetup outside of hours.
Has your experience as a single mom influenced your leadership style and decision making process?
Of course. So it's a very humbling experience being a parent. And so I now have an even greater appreciation for other people's lives and the complexity that they might be navigating. I don't ever try to assume that it's smooth sailing for everybody, or, we see people in their professional personas, but that's 8 hours out of 24. There's a whole lot else going on. So I've got a lot of empathy and compassion for my team. And I'm aware that a lot of them are parents as well, and some of them are sole parenting. And that's not just a female situation. It's predominantly been a female domain, being the sole parent, the sole caregiver of children. But there are some men that are in that position too. So again, a lot of empathy for that. So, and I never expect my team to be going hard out all the time as well, because I don't want burnt out people, and I don't want people who are ineffective at work, and then if they're burnt out, then that they take that home with them, and I don't want to see that. So it really has affected how I lead, for sure.
So, what do you do outside of work to maintain the resiliency and motivation?
Okay, so I do a lot of things. I like to be busy. So I've always sung, or I've been in a musical endeavor for as long as I've been alive, pretty much. So one of the things that I did is when I had my daughter, the first thing I went back to was singing. So I was singing and performing while I was heavily pregnant. I think the last thing I'd done was the Tauranga Jazz Festival with a gospel group, and I was 8 months pregnant. So, and I was out the front in more ways than one. And then that's the first thing I went back to. So when my daughter was 3 months old, I went back to singing. And it's the thing, singing and dancing is the thing that's consistent in my life. So I do, Thursdays are sort of my day for the extracurricular. So I always have a rehearsal on a Thursday, and I've also got a dance class. My daughter's always come to my dance class with me. So, and she participates or she doesn't. And yeah, we still do that every Thursday, and then the rest of the days of the week are hers. So I always have a creative outlet. I always make sure I make time for myself, which is generally after she's gone to bed. So if she's not in bed at her bedtime, I get really cranky because that's my time. What other rituals do I? Yeah, just the rituals. They're like the rituals around switching between my parent persona and my professional persona, like bringing they don't disappear. There's just one gets pushed to the front and the other gets pushed behind. Having those rituals around that has really, really helped me, and being really clear about my boundaries in that space too. Yeah.
Having worked in the tech sector for many years and also being a mentor, what is your observation about the tech industry in general? Is there enough support for parents, particularly single mothers?
So I think I think being in the tech sector is a bonus, actually. I think it's one of those spaces where, like, technology has enabled a lot of the things that single parents need, which is, flexible work arrangements, remote working options, um, all of that kind of stuff. That the mentoring helps with, like, participating in mentoring, whether you're a mentor or a mentee, is a really great way to help with your understanding your career and where you want to take it next. So I'm a big fan of mentoring. There are a whole lot of other things that are really important, which is, the mental health services that are available and things like that. So that, as a single parent working full time, being an employee definitely has its advantages over being self-employed. So there's the leave that we get 6 weeks leave at BNZ, which is phenomenal, amazingly good for school holidays, because then I can actually spend time with my child during the school holidays and not just send her off to a program. I have volunteer days as well, which means you can always go and be parent help for something in an extracurricular thing. So at the moment, I'm the treasurer for her. She's a part of a choir. I'm treasurer for her choir. But I've also been parent help on, like, a school excursion. It's usually a musical thing that I'm interested in. Like, we went to see Roger Fox Big Band. So may he rest in peace. He passed away earlier this year. But yeah, the primary school went to a thing where he was playing. So it's like, yes, I'll be parent help for that. And yeah, the counselling services and things that are available through work are fantastic. The new building in Wellington is amazing. There's a parent room, there's wellness rooms, there's the retreat area if you've sleep deprived, which, new parents often are. You can just take yourself off there for half an hour or so and recharge. Yeah, so many great things around that.
Great. What advice would you give to single moms aspiring for getting into leadership roles in tech?
Go for it. Like, go for it and be aware of what you're trading off when you go for it. So I'd say that to any woman, is just, just go for it. If it's what you want, just go for it. Even if it's not exactly what you want. I've gone for roles that I didn't want, but I felt like I should, because I'm female and I'm a single parent and there's not enough representation. So I feel an obligation to go for things. And there's been plenty of roles that I didn't get because my heart really wasn't in it. But I still felt like I needed to put my hat in the ring, even if it's just for visibility's sake. So yeah, I think that's really important, to challenge yourself. But if it is something you really want, just go for it. Go hard. Yeah, there's nothing that you can't work out. So it's just the trade-offs that you need to make. You just need to be really honest with yourself and really clear with yourself about what it is you're trading off and why. And I also have the funeral test, which is when I die, what do I want people to talk about me at my funeral? So do I want them to talk about, that I spend 100 hours a week doing work? No, I want them to say that I was a great mum, that I was, an active member in society, that I role modeled all these cool things, and that I, my child is an amazing human being, because that's a reflection of me. So those are the things that, matter.
Oh, so having worked in technology sector for all these years, what is your perspective on gender diversity in the sector?
Oh, it could be better. It really could. Tech Women are running the Shadow Tech, I think it's tomorrow in Wellington, which is about getting, it's for schools, and it's about getting girls interested in the tech sector. It's a fantastic industry for women, I think. I don't really understand why it's so underrepresented, because it's not that there's so much stuff that plays really well for women in the tech industry. I just think it's a secret for some reason. I don't know. There's so many, because technology has made so many more things possible, and being in that space means you get to leverage that stuff as well as help shape it. So yeah, we're not well represented, and needs to be more. And I'm not really understanding what's, like, I do understand what the systemic barriers are, but like, if I was a young thing again, it's like, no, this is where I'm going, because this is where there's a whole lot of stuff happening, whether you're a creative or anything. So I mean, I had a crossroads when I was 23. I was tossing up whether to go down the healthcare route or be a full-time artist or continue in the corporate space. And then I worked out, actually, I don't have to be exclusively one or the other. I just need to work out where my livelihood comes from and build the other two parts into my life and be intentional about it. So I think that's one of the questions as well, is like, what are the things that light your fire? What are you interested in? And maybe it's a hobby, then that turns into a career. Or maybe it stays a hobby, but you're still having some kind of influence and some kind of role in that space. So it's more than just being a job or a career. I think it's about how you live your life and how you participate in the broader ecosystem of the world, and technology is a big part of that.
You mentioned something about systemic barriers. What are they?
There are a lot of systemic structures in place. The whole 9 to 5 setup and the whole education setup is very much geared to heterosexual couples, where one person, typically the female, is available to support the other person, who's typically a male. Those are structures that are still very, very firmly entrenched in our society. And in my experience, you can try and fight against it and rail against it, or you can find a way to be like water and work around it and work so that it works to your advantage. And I'm more, I mean, when I was younger, I was definitely in the former camp. I was definitely a down with the patriarchy kind of person, but actually it's like, there are ways in and around it. And just by showing up and just by being present and speaking up. So one of the things I learned quite young, I used to be very, very shy, but it's like, no one can read my mind. No one knows what's going on for me. I have an obligation to speak up. So that's what I do. I made a decision. It was a very conscious decision. I must have been about 24. I tested my theory out on people at a railway station. It's like the belief I went into was like, everybody's got information for you, and you've got information for every other person. So you have an obligation to share. And I tested that out with random strangers at the railway station, and it was like, it was true. Everybody I asked a question of gave me an answer, and they walked away with something from me as well. It's like, okay, so that's how I choose to live my life. So that's one of the things that I do, is like, I try to speak up where I can, and I'm mindful of the people around me, but I'm also quite candid, I think. So that's, yeah.
So you reckon that the systemic barriers can be addressed by communication?
That's the way I've chosen to go. It's not the only way, obviously. It's like, how much time and energy do you want to put into a battle that you can't win? And how much time and energy do you want to put into the war that you could win? So it's between battles and wars. And it's like, if I'm here and I'm in people's face, then and I'm not going away, that's the thing that I can do. And it won't take too much away from me personally, because this isn't the only thing that I care deeply about. I do care deeply about those systemic issues. But I'm also, I care deeply about being a really good mother. But those two things aren't mutually exclusive. So by showing up, I'm modeling to my daughter that I can be successful in this particular space. But I can also be available to her when she needs me. So I guess that's how I kind of do it. So you've got 4,000 weeks. So you've got 4,000 weeks of life if you live to your 80, and it's like, what are you going to choose to do today? So it's all incremental.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, for me, coming from a different background to yourself, it might not always be easy to just show up and be on the face and
Mm,
just keep it going. So there could be people like myself who might just resign to the fact, as how you said, this is not a battle that is worth fighting.
mm, yeah.
Then the best option or the easiest option is to say, I resign. Like, maybe that could be the reason why we see very few women in senior technical roles. You don't really see many senior platform engineers or infrastructure roles or in security roles or network roles, right? Like, are we actually sending a message out there saying, it's a very tough decision. The systemic barriers, certain things, are stereotypes are so ingrained in our culture. So is it easier to just say, this is the way it is, and just resign to the fact we can't really make any change in immediate future? Might as well move on and see what else we could do.
Well, it is the easy option, and not everybody's up for the easy option, right? So other people are up for the hard option. So the position that I'm in is not the easy option, for sure. I hear what you say about different cultural norms. I have a huge advantage, I think, because my parents are Dutch, and the Dutch are not known for um, diplomacy or stepping back. There's a whole bunch of cultural things that I have that I realize are particularly unique. So if you want to learn more about Dutch honesty, there's a whole lot of memes on YouTube and stuff, and you will start to see what I mean. I've had to tone it down a bit because it's not really a culturally accepted thing in New Zealand. So yeah, so I do have some other advantages that are not available to other people. But it's like I choose to if I see a gender injustice, I'll speak up. If I see other discrimination, I find any kind of discrimination very unpalatable. So I will always point it out. The only times I won't is if I feel incredibly threatened. So like if there's a physical violence thing, I'm not going to go and point something out if I feel like I'm going to be um, vulnerable in that kind of situation. And that said, I have intervened where there was a guy, he had a scalpel and was going to have a go at a woman, and I stepped in. I didn't even think about it. It was just a second nature thing. It was just a visceral thing. I was very, very distressed afterwards because I realized how much danger I put myself in. That was when I was in my 20s, so a bit less of a filter around safety. But yeah, you have to be brave and courageous. So courageous conversations, brave conversations are really important conversations to have. And there's ways of making those conversations safer. So if you see something, if you're not able to say something in a group, then you can say it usually with a smaller group of people, or you can grab some allies. So it's not just one voice, it's more voices. There's lots of different ways. That's the whole thing about, the water metaphor. There's ways of working around it. I'm not a fan of, single one individual crusades, because that's not very effective. But if you can galvanize a bunch of people together, then that's way more effective. And like, I try to do that at work and stuff as well. So set up the Women in Architecture group so that there's more than just my voice, which I was the lone voice for a while there. And now there's significantly more women in architecture. It's fantastic. So now we've got a collective voice. Yeah, so finding opportunities to create a collective is really, really a useful thing to do, because then it's not just down to you, because that's always hard. Asking for help, doing things on your own, very difficult things. So groups are always better.
Cool.
Mm.
Now, looking ahead, what are your personal and professional goals?
Well, I'm currently reviewing my financial strategy. So I will have paid off my mortgage this year. My daughter's going to be going to high school. And it's like, yeah, I bought this house before she started school, had a 15-year plan. Same with my vehicle, bought a vehicle so that would last us 15 years. Have to stay put for 15 years. So that was kind of my frame. It's like 15 years. And then when she's 18 and she leaves home, although she tells me she's never going to leave home, so I'm going to have to leave home. So I'm just sort of reassessing my finances. My mother has become very frail, and going through sorting her out, getting her into some kind of better care arrangement and things like that when I'm far away from her. I'm kind of going, I don't want to put that burden on my child, so I'm going to make sure I'm sorted out by the time I'm 75, that I'm where I need to be and everything's easy to take care of. So I'm thinking about those sorts of things as well. So that's the whole financial reassessment stuff that's going on about. It's all to do with that. Career-wise, I'm really enjoying being a head of architecture. One of the things that I'm working on at the moment is maturing the architecture practice at BNZ. That's particularly the enterprise architecture practice. That includes, like, we've just gone through an exercise where we've almost nailed all of the competencies for enterprise architects, and then we'll go into solution architects and stuff. But I'm wanting to create pathways into enterprise architecture, because the traditional way, which is not the way I got into it, is generally through developer solutioning and into enterprise. But there's so many other ways into the role, and I want to try and sort of tease out what those pathways look like for others, so they can see themselves on that journey rather than going, oh, I have to be a developer first, because that's not true. Yeah, co-creating support mechanisms for other people like me. So like I said before, the Women in Architecture group is something I'm really, really passionate about. I set that up. The first circle was set up in 2019 when there were 3 of us. There were 2 solution architects and 1 enterprise architect. And then they got disestablished and I was on my own for a bit. And then, so as I said, we've grown again, which is great. Continuing with mentoring, both as a mentor and a mentee. And in terms of the industry, the things I'm looking at are generative AI. It's part of my sort of remit as head of Colleague Enablement and Data. So AI is interspersed through all of those things. So that's one area that I'm growing in terms of my own competency. I've got a couple of things in my personal technology learning space. So my current favorite is Claude. He's a wonderful generative AI. And I like his voice, like the way that the language that he uses is much more conversational than any of the other generative AIs I've used. Also super interested in quantum computing. I've always loved physics, was my favorite science at school. And the whole quantum side of it, the theoretical side, is just mind-blowing. So yeah, quantum computing is something I'm interested in.
Great, great, Tanya. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you. We haven't really spoken much with each other ever before.
No,
Yeah.
just a
So,
little bit here and there. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's really good to hear your story, get to know your background, and just hear more about the resilience and the vigor that you have, right? Being a single mom and still being very focused. Is there any message you'd like to share with our other single moms in tech or those who are considering entering into tech?
Tech is great. It makes the difference that tech can make to people's lives is phenomenal. So whether that's through the education system or the health system or banking, which is where I am, or actually in the tech itself, it's totally, it really does make a difference, but it can't do it in isolation of understanding what it means for people, how it affects processes, and the information side, because that's where the ethics and stuff comes in. So yeah, if you're into optimizing or efficiency and effectiveness, then tech is definitely somewhere that you can make a difference for people. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Tanya. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we will have you again for more conversation on more technical stuff, hopefully soon, especially
Okay.
on AI stuff, because we are currently working on building an AI tool as well in our website. So we could probably have more conversation
Cool.
around that. Cool. Thank you so much, Tanya. Nice.
Thank you.